Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Julia Bartz. Julia is a Brooklyn-based writer and practicing therapist. Her fiction writing has appeared in the South Dakota Review, InDigest Magazine, and more. The Writing Retreat is her first novel. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. And I just saw yesterday, congratulations, this is a Book of the Month Club choice too.
Thank you so much.
What
I
an
know,
exciting, right?
crazy. Yeah, it's very surreal, but very
I'm
excited.
sure. And this is your debut, so everything is so new and exciting. And I'm sure it's crazy too, but you got to just cherish the moments because these are, how long it took to write the book and all the editing and all the work and getting everybody. So now we're holding it in our hot little hands and we get to celebrate. So before I dig into all the wonderful things I loved about the writing retreat, can you tell our listeners a little bit about the book?
Sure. So the writing retreat is about a young woman named Alex who has pretty much given up on her dreams of becoming a published author when she receives a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to attend a writing retreat that's being put on by her favorite author, the esteemed feminist horror writer Rosa Vallow. When Alex gets there, she realizes that not only is this a retreat, it's also a writing contest. And Rosa is asking all the attendees to basically write a novel within 1 month, the month of February. And she is planning to give the winner a 7-figure publishing deal. So everyone's pretty excited about that.
I know, right? We'd all take that.
I love that. But Alex, jumps into her novel and is excited about it. But then strange things start happening within Rosa Vallow's mansion, and eventually one of the attendees goes missing. So Alex has to figure out what's really going on with Rosa Vallow and her estate, or she may go missing too.
That's such a good teaser. I mean, really, there is so much happening here. And one of the things I actually really love about Alex's novel is there is, the incredible mansion that Rosa, bought and eventually, refurbished and now lives in. What has sort of a story of its own, right? It has a past about, and can you tell us a smidge about that? Because that is actually the story that Alex writes, which it has this sort of ghostly element as well, which of course I absolutely love. Not that there's necessarily there's no ghosts in the story per se, but in her mind, these people are speaking to her. So tell us about Daphne and Horace.
Totally. Yeah. So this book is a thriller, but I say that it has horror elements to it because I just love haunted house stories so much. There's so many good ones. I think my favorites are Rebecca, The Haunting of Hill House, and Tananarive wrote a really good one called The Good House. So I was interested in creating this story around the estate. It's called Blackbriar Estate. And the story is that there is this woman named Daphne who is a spiritualist who moves in with her husband, who is a wealthy man, and she starts having these seances with 2 other women. And at a certain point, I don't want to spoil anything, but Daphne and some other people end up dead or missing, and nobody knows like what happened to them. So I actually loosely based Daphne on Hilma af Klint. She is, I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's an amazing artist and spiritualist she's actually the inventor of abstract art. She did it before Kandinsky and anyone else. And I went to see her show at the Guggenheim a few years ago, and this is exactly what she did. She was a spiritualist. She met with other women. They were calling themselves the Five, and they would have seances and they would channel writing and art through them. So I thought that idea was so cool, especially since writing itself feels like channeling. So I really wanted to kind of explore that and include that in the book.
That's, we don't talk about that nearly enough, and it comes up from time to time, but expand on that for people who are not writers, that idea of channeling, like,
Yeah.
explain what you mean. It's so true. It's so true.
It's kind of eerie, honestly. It's I can talk more about the origins of this novel idea, but certain aspects of it really felt like they just kind of like landed on me. And once I started writing kind of the more final version of this book, it did feel like channeling. You sit down to write and you're seeing scenes play out, you're seeing characters say things and do things. Sometimes you don't even expect, them to say or do the things that they say or do. So it's a really cool feeling, and
Yeah.
writing is really hard in a lot of ways, but I think that aspect of it is probably what keeps us coming back.
Yeah, it is true. It's almost like, if your job is really just to move your fingers and capture whatever is happening. And there's, like, I know Elizabeth Gilbert talks about the idea that there's like a story fairy, or,
Yeah.
I don't, and it lands on your shoulder. And if that's the right story for you, then all you really have to do is just like, let her do her job and take notes basically as it happens. So, um, yeah, I love that about it. I love the idea and the idea that the women that, of course, they're basically, persecuted, right? Because the spiritualist is sort of it's like one step, towards, being a witch. And so there's that, which, again, brings up sort of all of this feminist, like, women with, with spirituality or with knowledge or with, were persecuted, because that wasn't our role, right? Women were supposed to just, have babies and keep house. And anyway, so I love
Yeah,
the sort of the aspects of that as well.
totally. Yeah. And I actually was fascinated when I was doing a little bit of research. I highly recommend Mira Patassin wrote a book called The In-Betweens, which kind of goes into the history of spiritualism. But there is this tie that it has with feminism, one of the earlier forms of feminism, because it was one of the few ways that women could speak and be listened to. And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it too, and kind of depressing, right? That they had
Of
to
course.
chant people
Right,
to be listened to.
right,
Yeah.
right. I'm channeling a man, and so therefore what I say is going to
Yeah.
be important. Yeah. I mean, it is. And, in some ways, one of the things we reflect upon now, especially with everything going on in the climate, is that we're sort of moving back towards the place where it seems like men are going to try to speak for us. And but not to get to that. So I want to also, I mean, one of the things that is really also at the sort of heart of the story is this really close friendship. So Alex has this really close friend, Ren, and they were, incredibly close, and then they had this falling out, which ended, really abruptly and in kind of an ugly way. And Ren too ends up at this writer's retreat, which is, of course, Alex's kind of worst nightmare. And one of the things that struck me about this is that I think every woman, or has had at some point, whether we were, just young children or later in life or multiple times, that friend who felt like our best friend forever, and then something happened and the relationship ended, and it can be very devastating, as I think it was for Alex. And so I kind of wanted you to talk about the inspiration for that, and sort of, you know because it informs so much of the book as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that is something that was there from the very beginning. The first iteration of this book actually actually goes back to Montana, which I know you're from there.
Yes.
I actually did a NaNoWriMo in 2014, late 2014, so quite a long time ago. And for anyone who doesn't know what NaNoWriMo is, it's National Novel Writing Month. So I had actually forgotten that the first iteration of this book was like written in a month. I completely like did not remember that, but I went back and found that out. And I had written it after a trip to Montana. We went to Blue Sky, and it's so beautiful there. Oh,
Big Sky.
Yes, Big Sky. Sorry. I
Yeah,
think I was.
no worries. No, that's really close to me. I'm in Bozeman, so that's about 45 minutes. Yeah, it's incredible there.
Yeah, and on that trip, my family and I went to Yellowstone, and I just thought it was so otherworldly and interesting and cool, like the chromatic pool and everything. So I ended up writing this story about a woman named Alex who flees New York after a friend breakup from her best friend Ren. And I it's funny because in that early stage, I didn't know why they had a friend breakup, and I'm struggling because I know we don't want to give any spoilers.
But you figured it out.
Out and it was really interesting to kind of learn that alongside my own journey of like learning more about myself and kind of seeing certain friendships and relationships in a different light. And but I will say that I think, as you said, a lot of women and girls have these really intimate strong connections, and it's devastating when they end, and sometimes they can end in a really brutal way, or some big conflict happens, and especially when we're younger, we're not always able to work through it. So I really wanted to acknowledge that and explore that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about the girl breakup is that, of course, when you're girls, there's a sort of a pack of girls, right? And they take sides, right? So you break up, and then it's all of a sudden you've lost not just your best friend, but kind of all your friends. And there's this weird, I think it is a very, it's, unsettling and deeply emotional. And I think it really does impact sort of how we see ourselves and how we make friends, and in ways that are even maybe more impactful than breakups that we have with like a romantic partner. So that is, I think, is incredible. I actually just don't want to go back, because I love the idea that we're talking now about the first iteration of this book being 2014. And I think people who aren't writers or who are aspiring writers don't understand necessarily, or know that sometimes a book really does take 8 years or whatever to finally find its way to sort of the right story at the right time, and get completed. So tell us, you wrote it in a month, and then did you set it aside? Did you work on other things? I know you're also full-time work, so were there other books in between the original writing retreat and this one?
Yes, great question. Yeah, so that first iteration, and again, it was very like based off of my time in uh Montana and around Yellowstone too. um I There was a lot of the story that I found interesting. For example, Alex was actually the one who was sleepwalking in that version,
Mhm.
and Rosa was coming to her in dreams. Like she was walking out of the chromatic pool and like speaking to Alex, and she was this very otherworldly creature. And it actually turned out that she was an alien, so it was a very different, very different book.
Right, right.
Bye. But something about it, like I set it aside, something about it wasn't quite working. And then, as I mentioned to you earlier, the idea for like kind of setting it at the writing retreat descended on me. It was maybe like a couple of years later. I remember where I was. I was sitting outside eating lunch, and the idea just like popped into my head. The ferry landed, and
Yeah.
I was like scribbling down notes on my phone, and everything kind of clicked into place. And I felt very excited about this version. However, yeah, I was working on another book at the time. I've written 2 novels before the writing retreat that were not published, and I was working with an agent on it. We were doing a lot of drafts, and she actually decided to part ways with me at a certain point, and that too was like a bit devastating. I felt
Yeah.
like I was back at square one, and I wasn't sure like what to do. And I was wondering, like, can I really sit down and write a third book without any promise of anything happening to it? Like, there's so much work that goes into it. And I was also at this time changing careers to become a therapist. So there was a lot going on. But at a certain point, I was just so excited about the idea that I decided that I was going to write it, and really enjoy the process as much as possible, and use it to explore myself, my like the darkest corners of my mind, and also this idea of being a failed writer. So ironically, this is the book that got picked up.
Well, and there's actually so much truth in that. I have 3 books that are, I always say they're buried in the backyard, but I have 3 books that I wrote that never got anywhere. I had a similar agent that worked with me, and then, sort of decided she couldn't do anything for me. And it's all very common, but it is incredibly devastating at the time. And I think this is such a solitary business. It's really, I think we need to talk to other writers to be reassured that it's all sort of part of the process. And to your biggest point, if you don't enjoy the process of creating a book, is not the job for you, because 90 something percent of it is just you alone with the words. And if you would love that, and you're sort of like, you're somebody who wants to sort of explore themes about relationships, and what we'll do when we're pushed and all those things, then I think it can be incredible, and you do sort of learn to embrace it. But if you're not, then it's a horribly lonely, impossible job. And I say, go find go find something totally different. So that's really, you're not alone. Obviously, you're not alone, because there's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of us in a similar position. So,
Yeah, I've heard that that's actually pretty common. And I think, yeah, you're right. We just don't always talk about it because it feels like maybe shameful or something at the time. But yeah, I think as long as you can continue focusing on the work and what about it brings you joy. I'm actually so interested in the work that you do and like writing series like that like blows my mind. That is an even bigger, like there's a bigger arc and you really get to know the characters so well.
yeah,
I mean,
you do fall in love a little bit. Yeah. And in some ways it's easier because you're like coming back to people, it's like visiting old friends. And in some ways it's harder because, like you said, you do have to sort of keep a bigger eye on, well, how far in the arc do we get in this book, and is there room for, them to grow in the next book? And it's tricky, but I wanted to just go back to something that my first book came out in 2000, so I've been at this a long, long, long time. But I have a stack of rejection letters in a xylophone folder. This because, of course, when I was first sending queries, I sent them via mail, and I got mail back. So I had this things of rejection letters, including one that was like, the title of this is great and the rest of it stinks, which was probably really true. But at the time I was like, that is so mean. But I kept them, and I have them, and there's over 100 of them now, because of course, even when you're published, the rejections don't stop. And I kept thinking, I'm gonna like wallpaper a bathroom or something. And then I think, oh, maybe not a bathroom, because I would never want to go in there. But they do sort of serve as a badge of honor, right? That I think that what it shows is that I'm, persistent is one word, stubborn is another, to just keep going. So I think that's, and I think if you talk to really, really successful authors, so few of them don't have, that kind of, experience, of course. Another thing about the book that I thought was really interesting, and this sort of ties into what we're talking about, is the cost of art, right? Like, what does it cost the creator? What does it cost the people who read it and are surrounded by the creator? I'd sort of it seems to be something that is really sort of not too far under the surface of your story. And I wondered if it sounds like something you probably thought about, particularly in your own experience with writing. So I wondered if you would sort of expand on that.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's actually tied to what we've been talking about, which is I think that unless we're really making art for ourselves, it can be extremely painful, because I think in a lot of ways, there's this like bootstraps idea of just like follow your dreams, you'll get there, like keep going. And that's great. And I think that's correct, like keep going. But I think for me, for a long time, this was like my main goal. My main goal throughout my 20s was to get published, and into my 30s And when it didn't happen, it was, again, devastating. We're using that word a
Right.
lot
Yeah.
there. And I almost, quit because I couldn't keep doing it to myself. And I felt like, again, a failure. It felt very shameful. That was always my identity. Like before anything else, I'm a writer. I had a day job that I love. But I was, going to keep writing until I was published. But then at a certain point, like so much of it is out of your control. So, and, particularly for people who are marginalized, I have a lot of privilege, but, that's something that um, I think we need to be more open about. So it was actually really helpful for me to figure out kind of a plan B, okay, if I don't get published, what do I want my life to look like? And that's when I actually started therapy for the first time myself. And I loved it. So I'm one of those people who loves therapy. So I decided to become a therapist to kind of provide that space for other people to work through things. And it actually ended up really helping me because I think it helped deepen my characters and their motivations. But it was just so nice to not have everything riding on this
Right.
one.
Right. It's too much pressure. It
Yeah.
really is. And even when now that, even being published, it is then, I think that again, it's going to, because it becomes, and I don't want to ruin your debut experience because it's going to be fabulous, but there becomes that sort of like, what's the next thing and what's the next thing? And every sort of hurdle is this like back to the drawing board. I interviewed Sandra Brown, who obviously is phenomenal and has 100 New York Times bestsellers or whatever. And she said, that every time she starts a new book, she has that total terror. I don't know how to do this. I don't think I can do this again. How I don't know how I've done it 100 times. And she feels like she has to scale that wall with every new book. And some part of me was like, oh God, is this the rest of my life? Like every single time we're going to be like, back to square one. And but it's also, it's also true that it is, I think there's some magic to it. There's a lot of hard work, no question, but there is some magic. And I think if we squeeze hold on so tightly, we can sort of cut off the magic, right? So I think your idea of having a job that it's not writing, and maybe writing is your most favorite thing, but having a job you really like, that feeds you in a different way is so important. And I think I noticed when I quit my day job, which happened about what, oh God, it's probably been 15 years now, but it suddenly the writing got hard because it wasn't just like, oh, I have this other, I do this thing. And writing is my side gig. All of a sudden it was kind of all on that. So it takes it sort of takes this toll, um, in all sorts of ways. And then it also, of course, on the opposite, it feeds us in all
Really.
these really powerful ways.
And I
So
think that's also such a gift to be able to devote, more time to the writing and to be able to focus on it. And I should add that I don't think it's just career wise, but like where are the other places in our lives that we find fulfillment? Relationships, hobbies, trips, other things that we're doing, pets. Like I think it's just important to remember to slow down and enjoy the process, and also just enjoy all the other things that we have in our lives. So it's, yeah, that pressure is not too tight.
so true. And that for this, starting this podcast has actually been one of my, just the opportunity to talk to other women who are doing, writing incredible books and thinking about things in different ways, and to get it to explore in their brains is so, so exciting for me. So are you going to set a book in Montana? I'm like, you should come back out. There's a book there for you.
Oh,
No,
me too. Yeah, I would love that.
well, I have lots of guest space because now my children don't live here, so you should feel free at any time. Absolutely. So then, the idea of this sort of the writing contest is another sort of interesting, because there is this sense of I think we all, there's a sort of natural sense of like, well, if her book does well, mine won't do well, or, it's not, of course, that way, but it puts this intense pressure on these women whose goal is, Rosa has them writing 3,000 words a day for a month. I
Mhm.
mean, talk about intense pressure. Um, you know, how did that come to mind? A way to increase the tension or the conflict, or
Yeah, I think I wanted it to I don't when I think about it, I feel like if I was in that situation, it would be both like incredibly exciting and also a complete nightmare. Because again, that pressure, as we're talking about, is just like raised to an insane degree. Um, and yeah, I wanted to do something a little bit satirical about this feeling of competition and, I have to win or I'm going up against this person or that person. Because I think that that can come up for writers again, because it's so difficult to, get to certain stages. Um, and I also wanted the opportunity to go into Alex's novel. So I thought that I needed to have a reason for her to be writing so much. Um, but yeah, I think ultimately, I think the pressure was kind of the idea, this pressure cooker, and it increases hopefully for readers kind of throughout the book. I don't want to give anything away, but
it definitely does. The stakes definitely get higher. And the thing that we didn't mention, but also sets this all up, which is that Alex has experienced this incredible, like a year of writer's block, which is a
yeah,
real thing, particularly I think in times of high emotion. It's not something, there's a lot of jobs you can just do, without, when you're emotionally kind of unsettled. But I think writing is really not one of them, right? Writing requires this incredible amount of sort of like your whole energy has to be sort of, I mean, good writing, right? I mean, we can all kind of throw down, not that we, there's anything wrong with just the rough draft. My dog is trying to get out the door. Okay, Lucy, come here. Come and sit down. I have three dogs in here, and one of them is like, "Can you please let me out? Now is not a good time." Um, okay, but I am gonna let her out. So hold on one second. And then I want to talk about the process of like, when the book was done, did you okay, sorry, pause. Everybody knows I have dogs on this podcast because they're always
I love dogs.
I know. I have three dogs. Julia might be a couple dogs too many. But anyway, okay, sorry about that. Sorry, everybody listening. That was Lucy and Scotia. They had to get outside. So okay, so you finished this book, and then did you query agents with a completed manuscript, or did you query it with the sort of the close partial to the end? How did that happen for you, the sort of second go around?
Sure. Yeah. So, actually, can I quickly answer another thing that you were kind of bringing up a second ago? Because
Of
I found
course, I'm so sorry. Yes.
with regards to Alex's writing block, I think something that I wanted to show was how people can get out of it sometimes. And I have things that I do, when I get writer's block. Sometimes I think like free writing can be helpful, or watching, shows or movies or reading books like in the genre can be inspiring, or talking to friends can be helpful. But I also I wanted to really explore this messed up, I guess, for lack of a better term, mentorship that happens between Rosa and Alex. And I'm really fascinated by those types of mentorships. Silence of the Lambs is one of my favorite movies. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so this idea, Whiplash is another one that I really loved. So this idea of a mentor pushing their mentee almost to their limits, but also
Yeah.
helping them do like their best work. I thought that idea was so fascinating. And I like how Rosa, in not always appropriate ways, really does inspire Alex. And there's a scene where Alex comes up with just like this visual for the first scene of her book, and she's kind of off and running with it. So I really wanted to kind of explore that too. So in terms of my agent, yeah, so in my day, I have queried hundreds of agents. Again, I could wallpaper probably my whole apartment with project. Um, but I I finished the whole draft, and at that point I had several close friends read it, offer feedback. And this is also the first book that I really kind of plotted out beforehand and was like very, oh, now my cat's coming over to say hi.
Yeah.
um, that I really wanted to figure out the structure and make it
Yeah.
feel like hit every plot point, because I think that can feel very satisfying. I'm sure you do that too. You have to do that for a series. Um, but yeah, so by the time I had finished it, went on a trip to New Mexico with a friend. At this point, I think it was like summer 2021, and I sent out like some queries, and I started to hear back from people right away, which was super exciting and a very different experience than what I had experienced before querying agents. The funny thing is that I had included the first 10 pages pasted into the email, and
Yeah.
reads the book, the first word is the F word. So later on, the person, Alexandra Machinist, who is my agent, she's fabulous, like fantastic. I'm so lucky to be working with her. My sister works with her too, Julia Bartz, and Andrea was like, "That's weird that you haven't heard from Alexandra. Like maybe she didn't see it." And I just thought like, oh, she's just not interested. Like that's fine. But then we reached out to her. Andrea reached out to her, and it turned out that my query had gotten sent to the spam folder.
Because of the F word.
And that happened multiple times with multiple agents. So I was
Uh,
so horrified by that. But it all worked out. She, at the 11th hour, Alexandra said that she wanted to read it, and she read it really quickly, and she decided she wanted to represent me. So it was a very smooth process.
that's so funny. We haven't discussed the fact that your sister is also in this business, which is so cool. I mean, are your parents writers? Like, is it a whole family of writers, or just the two of you? Yeah. I mean, this is your show. I need to reach out to Andy because I'd love to have her on the show for her new book. She hasn't been on the show yet, and I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's so interesting. I think it does feel like it's a little kismet, right? The book was done, and you had sort of, you'd gone about it in a different way. And then sometimes I think walking away literally to New Mexico, kind of sending them out and being like, okay, I'm giving this a break. And then, it worked out. And look at you. I mean, this is a big debut, right? I mean, this is a beautiful, they've done a beautiful job. Your arcs are everywhere. You're in the Book of the Month Club. I mean, I mean, that is really like, that's kind of debut heaven, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I completely credit my team, my publicist, everyone. I'm at Emily Bessler Books, and everyone there has been just so excited and doing so much. And that's yeah, it's a dream come true, honestly.
Yes, yes. Well, I credit them all as well, but obviously most of the credit I give to you, Julia, because you did the work. But okay, so you mentioned something that I find really interesting, is that this round you actually plotted, you really plotted it out. So is that sort of how you think you'll do books from here on in?
I do. Yeah. I used to be a pantser, which is just writing by the seat of your pants for anyone who doesn't know. And it felt um there's something really beautiful about doing that. It feels very organic. It feels like you're really exploring your unconscious. However, I knew that for this book, which is more of a thriller than the last books that I wrote, I really wanted to explore suspense as much as possible, and that sense of suspense and dread, because I love feeling that when I'm reading things or watching things. And I think to do that, you really have to follow the structure, like the 3-act structure. There's a couple books. The Save the Cat Writes a Novel book is always helpful for just showing what are all the different plot points that you have. And yeah, again, I think there's something really satisfying about, as a reader, to not like see the structure, but kind of feel it underneath the
Yeah.
words. And um also just in terms of revelations or reveals that really add to the pleasure of reading something suspenseful. I really needed to be careful to kind of piece everything out and what's going to happen where. And not to say that I didn't go back and edit quite a bit, because I did, but that actually I think made it a bit easier to write it too. To kind of,
Interesting.
yeah, to know what was coming, to know what I still had to figure out.
Yeah, the next sort of point where you're heading. Yeah, I'm not an outliner. I really wish I
Oh wow.
were. I know it's, and it turns out that I can make a real mess of a first draft and then sort of have to, basically reverse outline it later. It's not, I would not necessarily recommend it, but I do think that there's just some people there's just the way you have to do it. And as much as I'd like to do it differently, this is sort of what works. But okay, well, so this one's out. This is out on the 21st. And I want to say, I'm gonna have to cheat and look at my thing. Yeah, so our podcast will come out the Thursday, the 23rd. So by the time you are listening to this, the writing retreat is out. You can get it on your book of the month, which will be, I'm sure, beautiful. They always do such a beautiful job. And you can get it your favorite independent store. You can get it wherever you can get it. It's so fun. And it does have, there's a little gothic-y horror,
Oh yeah.
which I really appreciate too. I really, really enjoyed that. Okay, so this is fabulous. Everybody get on this moment. And while we have you, what is next? I always feel like I kind of hate that question, because you're like, can I just celebrate this book? But no, you cannot. We want to know what you're working on now.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. I am working on my next book. I have like a 2-deal situation with Emily Bessler book, so I'm deep into the next book, and yeah, I think if you like the writing retreat, you're gonna like this book too. A lot of suspense and a little bit more of a focus on belief systems and how our realities can be shaped by the people around us.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, that's one of the things I think I like so much about this, is that there's a really, momentous plot that really keeps us reading, but there's so much depth in the characters and the situation, and their backstories. I mean, all of them actually, their backstories, and sort of their motivations for the things, good and bad, that they do. So I love this book, Julia. It was so fun. Thank you for joining me today. Julia told me before we started this was her first interview, and yet she's clearly an old pro. You're gonna I hope you get to hear her everywhere. It was such a treat.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
So for everybody listening, that was Julia Bartz today on Killer Women Podcast. Her book, The Writing Retreat, is glorious, so fun, so deep, so well paced, and a page turner. And you will, if you're like me, stay up much too late to finish it. So in the meantime, we will see you at the next Killer Women. Bye.
Thanks.